Vietnam, the jungle had no mercy, and the enemy had no fear. But neither did the Australians. They came from a land far from the war they were thrown into. Men who weren't looking for glory, but found themselves standing in places where glory didn't exist. The jungle didn't care who you were. The rain didn't stop for anyone. And the darkness, it swallowed entire armies whole. Yet somehow in the chaos, in the mud, the monsoon, the gunfire, these soldiers carved out moments of defiance the world would never forget. Moments where a handful of men held back a tide. Moments where artillery meant for distant hills fired point-blank to save a life. Moments where brotherhood mattered more than orders, fear, or survival. This is not a story about battles. It's a story about the men who fought them. Men who walked into hell together and refused to let each other fall. This is the story of a commander who carried 18 dead men in his head for the rest of his life. August 18, 1966, 4:08 p.m. Harry Smith sees the tracers before he hears the guns. Green streaks cutting through the rubber trees ahead. Then the sound catches up, machine gun fire, multiple positions, overlapping fields of fire. His radio crackles. Lieutenant Sharp's voice strained. Contact, heavy contact. We're engaged from multiple. The transmission cuts off, replaced by static and the sound of explosions. Smith is 28 years old, Major, commander of D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. He's responsible for 108 men currently spread across 400 meters of Vietnamese rubber plantation. And right now, his forward platoon is being destroyed. This is the moment Smith has trained for his entire military career. The moment every officer dreams about and dreads in equal measure. Command under fire. Life and death decisions with incomplete information and no time to think. Smith's hands don't shake as he reaches for the radio handset. His voice stays calm despite his heart hammering against his ribs. All stations, this is Sunray. Form defensive perimeter. Repeat, form defensive perimeter immediately. What Smith doesn't know yet is that approximately 2,500 enemy soldiers have surrounded his 108 men. He doesn't know he's outnumbered 23-1. He doesn't know that American command is already writing him off as dead. He doesn't know that in 4 hours, he'll either be a hero or a corpse. All Smith knows is that his men are dying, and he has seconds to save them. If you want to know how one man's decision saved 108 soldiers from annihilation, hit that like button. This is the Battle of Long Tan, the day Major Harry Smith refused to let his company die. The nightmare that started IT 2 days earlier. August 17, 1966, 2:43 a.m. Smith jerks awake to the whistle shriek of incoming mortars. The sound is unmistakable. Every soldier learns to recognize it. The whistle means you have maybe 3 seconds before impact. 3 seconds to decide whether diving for cover saves your life or wastes your last moments. Smith doesn't waste those seconds. He's through his tent flap and sprinting toward the nearest bunker when the first rounds detonate. The explosions are close, too close. Dirt and shrapnel tear through the air. His tent, where he was sleeping seconds ago, shudders as fragments rip through canvas. Nui Dat base erupts in chaos. Soldiers emerging from tents in various states of dress. Some in full gear, some in underwear clutching rifles. Everyone moving toward defensive positions through explosions and confusion. The distinctive crack of recoilless rifles joins the mortars. Enemy artillery. Coordinated attack. Smith reaches a bunker and dives inside. Other soldiers are already there, wide-eyed, adrenaline pumped, watching Smith for direction because officers are supposed to know what to do during mortar bombardment. Smith counts the impacts, professional habit, analyzing the attack pattern while explosions tear through the base. Too many rounds, too accurate, the enemy isn't firing blind. They know the base layout, artillery positions, command posts, vehicle parks. Either they have excellent reconnaissance or someone gave them intelligence. The bombardment lasts 22 minutes. Smith counts every minute. When it finally stops, the silence is almost as shocking as the noise was. His ears ring. Smoke drifts across the base. Wounded soldiers are calling for medics. Someone is screaming, high-pitched, sustained, the sound of severe pain. Smith emerges from the bunker and begins damage assessment. 24 wounded. One soldier lost his leg, a young private from Melbourne who Smith had spoken with yesterday. 7 vehicles damaged. 21 tents destroyed. The artillery positions took direct hits, but the guns are intact. Could have been worse. Could have been much worse. But what bothers Smith isn't what happened, it's what didn't happen. After artillery bombardment, you expect infantry assault, standard tactics. Mortars soften defenses, then ground troops exploit the chaos. But no assault came. The enemy just stopped, fired their mortars and withdrew. Smith has been in Vietnam 6 weeks, long enough to learn that when the enemy does something that doesn't make tactical sense, it means you're missing information. And missing information gets people killed. The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Townsend briefs Smith on the mission. Take D Company, find the enemy mortar positions, follow their withdrawal routes, gather intelligence, standard reconnaissance in force, contact possible but not expected in large numbers. Smith accepts the mission because refusing isn't an option, but the wrongness gnaws at him. Australian SAS has been reporting increased enemy activity for weeks. Multiple Viet Cong and North Vietnamese units converging in Phuoc Thi province. Supply movements, large-scale troop concentrations. All the signs pointing toward a major offensive being prepared. And now this mortar attack that seemed almost designed to draw Australian forces out of Nui Dat. Smith keeps these concerns to himself. He's a major. He follows orders. He trusts his training, his men, and his instincts. If trouble comes, he'll adapt. He'll make the right calls. He'll bring his men home. What Smith doesn't realize is that trouble is already waiting for him in a rubber plantation 3 kilometers away. And the decisions he'll make in the next 6 hours will determine whether 108 men live or die. August 18, 1966. The Walk into Hell. D Company departs Nui Dat at 11:00 a.m. 108 men marching into heat and humidity that feels like walking through soup. Smith positions himself with company headquarters in the center of the formation where he can control the battle if contact occurs. Standard doctrine, everything by the book. Smith watches his soldiers move through the terrain. They're good, well-trained, professional. Most are national servicemen, conscripts doing their mandatory 2 years, but they've adapted to Vietnam. They know their jobs, they trust their leaders. The march takes hours through difficult terrain. Rice paddies, jungle, streams. The heat is oppressive. Soldiers drink from canteens and sweat through their uniforms. Nobody complains. Complaining doesn't make the heat less brutal. At 3:15 p.m., they enter the long tan rubber plantation. Smith feels immediate unease. The place is wrong. Rows of rubber trees extending in perfect geometric lines. Unnatural, like walking through an architect's design rather than natural forest. The spacing is regular, maybe 10 meters between trees. Visibility is decent initially, but the tree rows create visual barriers that limit sight lines. Smith deploys the company in extended line formation. Maximum frontage, maximum observation, standard tactics for preventing ambush. The extended line means if the enemy hits them. Not everyone gets pinned simultaneously. Reaction time, tactical flexibility, everything they've trained for. They're following enemy tracks from the mortar positions, boot prints in the mud, discarded equipment, old firing positions with brass casings scattered, all leading deeper into the plantation, all pointing east. Smith's instincts are screaming, something is wrong, but there's no concrete threat, just tracks, just evidence of enemy withdrawal, just a feeling in his gut that won't shut up. At 3:35 p.m., 11 Platoon encounters a small enemy patrol at a track crossing. Brief firefight. One enemy killed. AK-47 recovered. The enemy scatters into the plantation. Lieutenant Sharp radios requesting permission to pursue. Standard procedure. Maintain contact. Determine enemy strength. Smith gives permission. It's the right call tactically. Following enemy contact often produces valuable intelligence. But 33 minutes later, this decision will haunt Smith for the rest of his life because he just sent Sharp toward an ambush that will kill him. At 3:40 p.m., 11 Platoon begins pursuit. They're moving fast, following the fleeing enemy. Standard aggressive tactics. What they don't know is they're being drawn into a kill zone. What Smith doesn't know is that he's about to fight the largest battle of the Vietnam War involving Australian forces. 4:08 p.m., the moment everything changes. Sharp's radio transmission is panicked, fragmentary, words cutting through static, multiple machine guns taking casualties surrounded. Smith's training activates, emotion shuts down, analysis mode engages. His brain processes information at machine gun speed. Multiple machine guns equals prepared ambush positions. Surrounded equals force larger than platoon-sized. Casualties equals men dying right now while he's standing here. Decision time, the most important 30 seconds of Smith's career. Smith keys his radio. His voice is calm, authoritative, zero panic detectable. All stations form defensive perimeter immediately. 10 platoon move to support 11. 12 platoon prepare to reinforce. Then Smith turns to Captain Morris Stanley, the New Zealand artillery forward observer accompanying D Company. Stanley is already on his radio. Contact with large enemy force. Grid reference. Stanley's voice is professional despite chaos erupting ahead. Those New Zealand artillery crews are about to become the difference between survival and annihilation. Smith moves forward with company headquarters, not running, moving deliberately. He needs to see the tactical situation before making more decisions. Running creates panic. Panic kills soldiers. Smith won't allow panic. The volume of fire ahead is increasing. Machine guns, automatic weapons, explosions, not decreasing, not slackening, that's bad. Means the enemy isn't breaking contact. Means they're committed to the fight. Means they believe they can win. Through the trees, Smith sees 11 platoons position. Soldiers behind rubber trees returning fire. Muzzle flashes in multiple directions surrounding them. Smith's stomach drops as the tactical picture crystallizes in his mind. This isn't company-sized. This is battalion-sized. Maybe bigger. His 108 men just walked into a force 10 or 20 times larger. The numerical odds are catastrophic. American command would estimate survival chances at near zero. Standard tactical doctrine says surrounded forces outnumbered 10 to 1 don't survive. But Smith isn't interested in what doctrine says. He's interested in keeping his men alive. The first artillery shells impact at 4:23 p.m., 15 minutes after contact began. That's fast response time. The New Zealand gunners at Nui Dat fired the moment Stanley called the mission. No hesitation, no verification. They trusted Stanley's coordinates and fired. Explosions erupt among enemy positions. Smith sees it happen. Enemy soldiers in khaki uniforms massing for assault, caught by artillery fire. Bodies thrown. The assault that was forming disintegrates. Artillery just saved 11 platoon from being overrun in the next 60 seconds. Smith makes his second critical decision. All stations contract the perimeter, tight defensive position. Nobody advances. We hold here. The extended line collapses into concentrated defensive perimeter. Soldiers pull back from forward positions. Reposition. Establish overlapping fields of fire. Machine guns positioned for maximum coverage. Grenadiers ready. Officers and NCOs organizing their sections. Smith positions himself at the perimeter center where he can see everything, where he can control the battle, where his men can see him remaining calm under fire. Leadership is performance. Soldiers watch their officers. If the officer panics, soldiers panic. If the officer stays calm, soldiers stay calm. Smith stays calm, externally. Internally, his mind is racing through calculations. 108 soldiers. Standard ammunition load maybe 200 rounds per man. M60 machine guns maybe 500 rounds per gun. Against an estimated 2,000 enemy soldiers willing to die to overrun this position. Mathematics says ammunition runs out in approximately 90 minutes at current engagement rate. Then it's bayonets and grenades. Then it's dying. Smith buries that thought, focuses on immediate problems. Artillery support is working. Enemy assaults are being broken up, but the enemy keeps coming, wave after wave. The grinder, when discipline meets desperation. The enemy attacks in human waves. Smith watches formations of 50 to 100 soldiers advancing through the rubber trees, coordinated, disciplined, accepting casualties. The strategy is brutal and effective, overwhelmed through numbers. Keep attacking until defenders run out of ammunition, then finish them. Smith calls artillery on every wave. Stanley, now bleeding from shrapnel wounds but still directing fire, brings shells down within meters of Australian positions. Danger close. Military doctrine says you don't fire artillery within 200 meters of friendly positions. Stanley is calling fire at 50 meters. One miscalculation and Australians die from their own artillery. But there's no choice. Without artillery, the enemy overruns them in minutes. The Australian soldiers maintain disciplined fire. Smith watches them with professional pride mixed with heartbreak. They're not panicking, not firing wildly. They pick targets, fire controlled bursts, conserve ammunition exactly as trained. Corporal Bob Buick's section is engaged from two directions. Buick is calm on the radio. Sunray 6th section, enemy left in front. We're holding. That's all. No panic, no drama, just professional situation report under fire that would kill most men. Private Dave Sabin's M60 machine gun team is firing sustained bursts into enemy formations. The M60 is devastating at this range, but it chews through ammunition. Sabin's assistant gunner feeds belts as fast as Sabin fires. They're rationing bursts now, 3-round bursts instead of sustained fire, making every round count. At 4:55 p.m., Smith receives a radio call that stops his heart. Sunray, some of us are out of ammo. We're cheering the artillery now. Soldiers without ammunition, cheering artillery because it's the only thing keeping enemy soldiers away from their positions. Smith's worst fear is manifesting. The mathematics are catching up. Ammunition is running out and the enemy keeps coming. At 5:00 p.m., 11 platoon's radio crackles back to life after being damaged. Corporal Bill Buick's voice. Sunray, this is 11. Sharp is KIA. Repeat, Sharp is killed in action. Lieutenant Jeff Sharp, 22 years old, competent, leading from the front, is dead. Smith processes the information without external emotion because emotion is luxury he can't afford right now. Sharp's death means leadership void at platoon level, means unit cohesion threatened, means soldiers who trusted their platoon commander now have to trust whoever takes command. Smith immediately radios 11 platoon, Corporal Buick, you have command, hold your positions, reinforcements coming, artillery continues, you will hold, acknowledge, acknowledged, will hold. Buick's voice is steady. That steadiness will save lives in the next 2 hours. At 5:02 p.m., Smith makes a desperate call to base. He requests airstrikes and ammunition resupply. Both are Hail Mary plays. Airstrikes risk hitting his own men. Helicopter resupply under fire is nearly suicidal for pilots. But without both, the company dies. Smith doesn't mention that on the radio. He simply requests air support, ammunition resupply, urgent. Townsend's response, understood, we're working it. That's all. Smith doesn't need more. Either help arrives or it doesn't. Either they survive or they don't. Smith focuses on what he can control: artillery targeting, perimeter integrity, unit morale. At 5:25 p.m., approximately 200 enemy soldiers appear in front of D Company's position. Smith hears whistles and bugles, enemy commanders coordinating assault. Then 2 waves of troops attack. The fighting becomes desperate, close range, personal. Smith is directing artillery, repositioning soldiers, coordinating fire support, maintaining radio contact with all platoons simultaneously. He's operating at peak capacity, maximum stress, maximum pressure. This is what command training prepares you for, but nothing fully prepares you for this. The storm, 6:00 p.m. The monsoon hits like a wall of water. Visibility drops to meters. Rain so heavy it's like being underwater. Smith can barely see his own soldiers 10 feet away. Water pooling in defensive positions. Equipment soaked. Radios struggling. The rain actually helps. Enemy fire slackens because they can't see targets either. But it also means helicopters carrying ammunition might not make it through. Means visibility is near zero. Means fighting in the dark against overwhelming odds. At 5:40 p.m., just before the rain, something extraordinary happened back at Nui Dat that Smith won't learn about until later. Lightning struck the artillery positions, knocked one New Zealand switchboard operator several meters backward, knocked another unconscious, destroyed the TAN speaker system used to communicate orders to each gun, blew one of the latrines to pieces. The artillery crews now have to shout orders through daisy chains of men, but they keep firing. Most spare personnel at Nui Dat, cooks, drivers, clerks, admin staff, are now working the guns, carrying ammunition, loading. Everyone understands that D Company lives or dies based on those guns firing continuously. Smith doesn't know about the lightning strike. He just knows artillery keeps falling on target, keeps breaking up enemy assaults, keeps saving his company. At 6:20 p.m., Smith receives the radio call he's been dreading. Colonel Townsend, Sunray, what's your situation? Smith looks at his perimeter. Soldiers firing into rain and darkness. Casualties being treated in the center. Ammunition nearly exhausted. Enemy massing for another assault. Smith keys his radio. This moment will define his career. 2 platoons 75% effective. 1 platoon nearly destroyed. Ammunition critical. Organizing all-around defense. Then Smith says the words that communicate everything without stating it explicitly. If the APCs don't arrive soon, don't bother. 3 seconds of silence. Then Townsend, understood, APCs are moving, hold your position. Smith just told his commanding officer that without reinforcements arriving within minutes, D Company will be overrun and destroyed. Don't bother means don't waste more lives trying to recover corpses. It's the most honest communication Smith has ever transmitted. Back at Nui Dat, everyone monitoring the radio net understands what Smith just said. The men of a company who returned from patrol 3 hours ago and were eating steak sandwiches and drinking beer suddenly understand how desperate D Company's situation is. They watch the frenzied activity at the artillery positions. Every available man working the guns, cooks, drivers, clerks, everyone. The urgency is palpable. Meanwhile, 13 American APCs are trying to depart Nui Dat but hit a problem. Engineers close the gap in the perimeter wire, and the APC commander doesn't know where the new gap is located. The APCs sit there with engines rumbling while someone finds an engineer who knows. The engineers are having evening meal. Every second of delay could mean D Company dies. Finally, an engineer arrives and pulls the barricade aside. The APCs rumble toward Long Tan carrying a company reinforcements. Smith doesn't know about any of this. He just knows the APCs aren't here yet, and ammunition is running out, and the enemy is massing for another assault. And he's made every right decision tactically, but right decisions don't matter if reinforcements don't arrive. 7:00 p.m. The miracle. Smith hears it before he sees it. Diesel engines, heavy, multiple vehicles crashing through plantation undergrowth. The most beautiful sound he's ever heard. American armored personnel carriers burst into the perimeter, 13 of them, carrying a company reinforcements. The APCs immediately engage with .50 caliber machine guns. The heavy guns tear through enemy positions. Combined with artillery still falling and Australian defensive fire, it's overwhelming. The enemy assault breaks, figures retreating into darkness, fire slackening. By 7:10 p.m., enemy fire ceases completely. They've withdrawn. Smith doesn't celebrate, doesn't relax. He maintains defensive posture waiting for renewal of attack. But the attack doesn't come. The enemy has withdrawn. The battle is over. D Company survived. Smith begins casualty accounting. The numbers come in over radio. 18 killed, 24 wounded, 42 casualties from 108 men. Nearly 40% casualty rate. In conventional military terms, a unit sustaining 40% casualties is considered combat ineffective. But D Company isn't combat ineffective. They held. They won. Smith saved his company, not through heroics, not through personal bravery, through calm, professional leadership under impossible pressure, through making the right decisions at critical moments despite incomplete information and overwhelming stress. Form defensive perimeter. Call artillery immediately. Maintain unit cohesion. Request reinforcements. Hold until relief arrives. Simple decisions, obvious in hindsight. But in the moment, surrounded by chaos and violence and death, those decisions saved 90 men who would have died without Smith's leadership. August 19, 1966, the morning after. Smith walks the battlefield at first light. He hasn't slept. Neither has anyone else. They maintained defensive positions through the night waiting for enemy renewal that never came. Enemy bodies everywhere, scattered throughout the rubber plantation. Smith counts with the burial teams. 10 bodies, 20, 50, 100. The counting continues. By mid-morning, 245 confirmed enemy dead. Intelligence estimates actual deaths at 350-400, accounting for bodies the enemy recovered during night. The casualty ratio is approximately 10-1 in favor of the Australians, against an enemy that outnumbered them 23-1. By any military metric, it's an overwhelming tactical victory. But Smith doesn't feel victorious. He feels exhausted, hollowed out, guilty. Smith walks to where Lieutenant Sharp's body lies covered by poncho. Sharp was 22, young, competent, married. He had a wife back in Australia. Smith sent him forward to pursue enemy contact. The decision was tactically correct, but correct decisions still kill people. Smith will carry Sharp's death and 17 others for the rest of his life. The burden of command, what they don't tell you. Smith received the Military Cross for his leadership at Long Tan, decorated, honored. His tactical decisions became textbook examples taught at military academies. He continued his career, eventually retiring as Major General. But the honors never erased the guilt. In interviews decades later, Smith described Long Tan as simultaneously his finest and worst day. We won, but 18 men died. You don't celebrate that. You remember it, you carry it. Smith suffered from PTSD for years. Nightmares, flashbacks, survivor's guilt. Why did he survive when Sharp didn't? Why did he make decisions that saved 90 men but cost 18 lives? Intellectually, Smith understood he made the right calls. Emotionally, understanding doesn't ease guilt. Smith became an advocate for veteran mental health. He spoke publicly about PTSD. He encouraged soldiers to seek help. He admitted his struggles. In military culture that traditionally views mental health issues as weakness, Smith's honesty was revolutionary. Leadership means carrying weight, Smith said in a 2015 interview. The weight of decisions, the weight of responsibility, the weight of men who died because of orders you gave. You carry that weight forever. There's no putting it down. You just learn to carry it. 2016, 50 years later. August 18, 2016, Long Tan Commemoration Ceremony. Smith is 78 years old. He walks through the rubber plantation. Older now, trees regrown, but the landscape recognizable. He stands where his command post was, where he made the decisions that saved his company. A journalist approaches, asks Smith what he thought about during the battle. Smith's answer is simple. I thought about keeping my men alive. That's all, not tactics, not strategy, not winning, just keeping them alive. I saved 90. I lost 18. The 18 haunt me more than the 90 comfort me. The journalist asks if Smith considers himself a hero. Smith's response is immediate. No, I was a soldier doing my job. The heroes are the 18 who died and the 90 who held despite impossible odds. I just made decisions. They did the fighting. The truth nobody tells you about heroism. Here's what nobody tells you about heroism. It's not dramatic. It's not glorious. It's making impossible decisions with incomplete information and hopping your right. It's staying calm when everyone else is panicking. It's accepting responsibility for outcomes you can't fully control. It's carrying the weight of decisions that killed men under your command. Harry Smith was heroic because he refused to let his men die when every rational calculation said they should die. He was heroic because he made the right decisions at critical moments despite overwhelming pressure. He was heroic because he carried the weight of command, including the guilt of men who died, for the rest of his life. The Battle of Long Tan isn't a story about 108 men defeating 2,500 enemies. It's a story about one man's leadership saving 90 soldiers who would have died without him. It's a story about decisions made in seconds that determine who lives and who dies. It's a story about carrying weight that never gets lighter. Smith died in 2024 at age 86. Hundreds attended his funeral. The eulogy described him as a hero. Smith would have rejected that description. But the 90 men of D Company who survived Long Tan because of Smith's leadership knew better. They knew that calm decision-making under chaos saved their lives. They knew that leadership when it mattered most prevented catastrophe. They knew that Harry Smith was the reason they went home. The final lesson. If this story made you understand what real leadership looks like, share it. The 18 Australians who died at Long Tan deserve to be remembered. The 90 who survived deserve to be honored. And Harry Smith deserves recognition as a leader who saved his company through professional excellence under impossible circumstances. Drop a comment if you want more stories about real heroes who don't wear capes, just uniforms and the weight of responsibility. This history matters. Understanding leadership under pressure matters. Truth about sacrifice matters more than comfortable myths about glory. And if you made it this far, remember this. Most people quit when things get impossible. Harry Smith didn't. His men didn't. Neither should you. Because that's the real lesson of Long Tan. Not that good guys always win. Not that justice prevails. Not that heroes are invincible. The lesson is that when everything is impossible, when the odds are catastrophic, when survival seems unlikely, leadership matters. Decisions matter. Discipline matters. Refusing to quit matters. Harry Smith proved that on August 18, 1966, and his 90 surviving soldiers proved it by holding impossible ground until relief arrived. That's the story worth remembering. Not the tactics, not the statistics. The human story of one man carrying weight that would break most people and carrying it with grace and honor for the rest of his life. There's a moment in combat when you stop trying to be brave and start trying to stay alive. For Phil Bennett, that moment came when the darkness around him opened fire. May 13, 1968, 2:30 a.m. Fire Support Base Coral, Vietnam. Lieutenant Colonel Phil Bennett jerks awake to the sound of incoming mortars. He's 34 years old, commander of 102 Field Battery, Royal Australian Artillery. His 6 105 howitzers are positioned in a rough circular formation at Fire Support Base Coral, a newly established fire base that didn't exist 24 hours ago. His gunners are sleeping in hasty defensive positions around the guns. The base perimeter isn't fully established. Wire isn't complete. Defensive positions are shallow. They're vulnerable. Bennett knows all this. He's been worried about it since they arrived yesterday afternoon. The base was established too quickly. Not enough time for proper defensive preparation. Not enough infantry security. The fire base is basically a collection of artillery pieces surrounded by soldiers sleeping in holes that aren't deep enough. And now the mortars are falling. Bennett is moving before conscious thought kicks in, grabbing his weapon, helmet, running toward his guns. Around him, other soldiers are scrambling from sleeping positions. Explosions tear through the fire base, the distinctive crack of recoilless rifles. Then something worse, automatic weapons fire from multiple directions. Not harassment, not probing attack, full assault. Bennett reaches his gun line and his blood freezes. Enemy soldiers are inside the perimeter, not outside the wire. Inside, maybe 50 meters away, advancing toward his guns. If they capture or destroy his artillery, the entire fire base loses its primary defensive weapon. Bennett makes a decision in milliseconds. His artillery can't fire indirect missions right now. The enemy is too close, but the guns can fire direct. Point the howitzer at the enemy and pull the trigger. Use artillery as giant shotguns loaded with beehive rounds, fléchette ammunition that turns a 105mm cannon into the world's largest shotgun. Bennett starts screaming orders. Direct fire, load beehive, traverse right, fire when ready. His gunners respond instantly. Training overrides fear. They swing the guns toward enemy positions. Load beehive rounds, fire. The howitzers roar. Thousands of fléchette darts spray toward enemy soldiers at point-blank range. The effect is devastating. But the enemy keeps coming, wave after wave. Bennett realizes with sick certainty that this isn't a company-sized attack. This is regimental-sized, maybe 2 regiments. Thousands of enemy soldiers attacking a fire base that has maybe 400 defenders and incomplete defensive positions. The mathematics are brutal. If the enemy overruns his guns, the fire base loses artillery support. Without artillery, the infantry can't hold against this many attackers. Without the fire base, Australian forces lose their ability to interdict enemy movements toward Saigon. Bennett's decisions in the next 4 hours will determine whether 400 Australians survive or die. If you want to know how artillery gunners fought enemy soldiers with howitzers as shotguns and survived the largest North Vietnamese assault on Australian forces in the entire war, hit that like button. This is the Battle of Coral. The night Phil Bennett's artillery battery saved a fire base from annihilation. May 12, 1968, the setup. Bennett receives the operational briefing 36 hours before the battle. First Australian task force is deploying north toward the Saigon approaches. Intelligence indicates North Vietnamese forces are staging for another offensive against Saigon, following the Tet offensive 3 months ago. Australian forces will establish Fire Support Base Coral approximately 25 kilometers northeast of Saigon to interdict enemy movements. Bennett's battery, 102 Field Battery, will provide artillery support. 6 105mm howitzers, Approximately 100 gunners, command staff, and support personnel. They'll establish defensive positions, dig gun pits, coordinate fire missions supporting infantry operations in the area. Standard firebase establishment. Bennett has done this dozens of times, but something feels wrong about this one. The operational tempo is too fast. They're establishing the firebase in an area where intelligence suggests significant enemy presence. Not enough time for proper reconnaissance. Not enough time for thorough defensive preparation. Bennett voices his concerns to his commanding officer. The response is what he expected. We don't have time for perfect preparation. We need the firebase operational immediately. Make it work. Bennett is a professional. He follows orders, but the wrongness gnaws at him. On May 12, helicopters ferry Bennett's battery to the firebase location. The area is thick jungle cleared just enough for helicopter landing zones. The infantry, 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, is establishing perimeter security. Engineers are clearing fields of fire, but everything is rushed. Too fast. Too exposed. Bennett supervises gun positioning. The 6 howitzers are placed in a rough circle, standard firebase doctrine. Ammunition is stockpiled near each gun. Defensive positions are dug around the guns, but the positions are shallow, maybe 2 feet deep instead of the 4 feet that provide adequate protection. There isn't time to dig deeper before darkness falls. The defensive wire isn't complete. Sections of perimeter have gaps. The firebase is supposed to be a hardened defensive position. Right now, it's a collection of artillery pieces surrounded by soldiers in inadequate defensive positions. As darkness falls on May 12, Bennett walks the perimeter assessing vulnerabilities. He counts the gaps, the incomplete wire, the shallow positions. If the enemy attacks tonight in force, the firebase won't hold. Bennett returns to his command post and briefs his gunners. We're vulnerable tonight. Defensive positions aren't complete. Wire isn't finished. If contact occurs, immediate response is critical. Sleep in your defensive positions. Weapons ready. We hold this firebase or we die trying. His gunners understand. They've served with Bennett long enough to trust his instincts. If he's worried, they're worried. They settle into defensive positions for the night. Most sleep with weapons in hand. Some don't sleep at all. The jungle beyond the perimeter is dark and silent. Too silent. At 2:30 a.m. on May 13, the silence ends. 2:30 a.m. The assault begins. The first mortar rounds impact near Bennett's command post. He's awake instantly. More explosions, multiple mortars, concentrated fire. Bennett counts impacts calculating enemy artillery concentration. Too many tubes. This is battalion-level fire support, means battalion-level assault force. Then the mortars stop. Brief silence. Bennett knows what's coming next. Infantry assault preceded by artillery preparation. Standard doctrine. The automatic weapons fire starts from multiple directions. Not outside the wire. Inside. The enemy infiltrated during mortar barrage, or they were already inside before the bombardment. Either way, enemy soldiers are engaging from within the firebase perimeter. Bennett reaches his gun line and sees chaos. Enemy soldiers, khaki uniforms, AK-47s, advancing toward gun position 6, maybe 40 meters away. His gunners are returning fire with rifles and machine guns, but rifles won't stop a company-sized assault. Bennett makes the critical call. All guns direct fire, load beehive, traverse to enemy positions, fire on my command. Gun position 3's crew responds first. They swing the howitzer toward enemy soldiers, load a beehive round. The gunner waits for Bennett's command. Bennett watches enemy soldiers advancing through the dark. They're close, maybe 30 meters. If this doesn't work, they'll overrun the gun position. Fire. The howitzer roars. The beehive round, containing thousands of small fléchette darts, sprays toward enemy positions. The effect is like a giant shotgun blast. Enemy soldiers in the impact zone are shredded. The advance falters. But more enemy soldiers keep coming, wave after wave. Bennett realizes the attack is larger than company-sized. This is regimental, maybe 2 regiments, thousands of attackers against his 400 defenders. Bennett coordinates fire from all 6 guns. They're firing beehive rounds directly at enemy positions. The howitzers weren't designed for this. They're indirect fire weapons. You calculate trajectories, elevation, windage. You don't point them at the enemy and shoot like rifles. But tonight, Bennett's guns are the firebase's primary defense. Gun Position 6 takes concentrated enemy fire. The gun sergeant, Sergeant Ray Alcorta, is directing fire when an RPG explodes near his position. Shrapnel tears through his leg. Alcorta goes down, blood everywhere. But Alcorta keeps directing his gun crew. Wounded and bleeding, he refuses evacuation. Bennett watches Alcorta work through the pain. That's leadership. That's what holds units together under impossible pressure. Officers and NCOs who refuse to quit regardless of circumstances. At 3:15 a.m., enemy soldiers breach the perimeter near a company's position. They're inside the firebase. Hand-to-hand fighting, grenades, close quarters chaos. Bennett can hear the fighting, screaming, explosions, automatic weapons at close range. Then he gets the radio call he's been dreading. Sunray, Gun Position 6 is overrun. Repeat, Gun 6 captured. The enemy has captured one of his howitzers. Bennett's stomach drops. Captured artillery means the enemy can disable it or potentially turn it against Australian forces. More critically, it means the enemy penetrated deep enough to reach the gun line. The firebase's primary defensive weapon is being overrun. Bennett immediately radios for infantry support to retake Gun Position 6. Then he redirects his other 5 guns to fire directly at enemy positions near Gun 6. But he has to be careful. Australian infantry is fighting in that area. Fire too close and he kills his own men. The fighting around Gun 6 is desperate. Australian infantry from a company counterattacks. Enemy soldiers occupy the gun position. Grenades fly, automatic weapons. The fight lasts maybe 15 minutes. Finally, Australian infantry retakes the position. When they secure Gun 6, they find it intact. The gun crew had removed the firing pin before abandoning the position, standard procedure to prevent enemy use. The gun is intact but temporarily disabled. Bennett's gunners will need to reinstall the firing pin and get it operational again. By 4:00 a.m., the enemy assault begins to falter. Australian defensive fire, artillery, mortars, machine guns, rifles, is too intense. Helicopter gunships arrive and begin strafing enemy positions. The volume of fire becomes overwhelming. At 6:30 a.m., enemy fire ceases. They've withdrawn. The first assault on Coral is over. Bennett walks the gun line assessing damage. Gun Position 6 has shrapnel damage but is repairable. Ammunition stockpiles are depleted but sufficient. His gunners are exhausted but functional. Then he gets the casualty report. 9 Australians killed, 28 wounded. Bennett personally knew 3 of the dead. Young soldiers, good men. Dead because the firebase was established too quickly without adequate defensive preparation. Bennett feels the weight settle on his shoulders. Command means responsibility. The firebase's defensive inadequacies contributed to those deaths. Bennett recommended more preparation time. His recommendation was overruled, but overruled recommendations don't ease guilt. Outside the perimeter, Australian infantry count enemy bodies. 52 confirmed dead. Drag marks indicate many more were removed. Intelligence estimates enemy casualties at 100 plus killed, unknown wounded. The casualty ratio favors the Australians, but 9 dead Australians is 9 too many. May 13-15, Preparation for round 2. The next 48 hours are spent fortifying coral. Engineers improve defensive wire. Infantry deepens defensive positions. Bennett's gunners dig proper gun pits, 4 feet deep with overhead protection. Ammunition is restocked. Fields of fire are cleared. Bennett supervises obsessively. He walks every meter of perimeter, checks every gun position, ensures ammunition supplies are positioned for rapid access, coordinates fire plans with infantry commanders. By May 15, fire support base coral has transformed from hasty defensive position into hardened firebase. The defenses that should have existed on May 12 now exist. Wire is complete. Positions are deep. Interlocking fields of fire established. If the enemy attacks again, coral is ready. But Bennett knows they'll attack again. The first assault was reconnaissance in force. The enemy tested Australian defenses, identified weaknesses, withdrew to regroup. Standard tactics. Next attack will be larger, better coordinated, more lethal. Bennett briefs his battery. They're coming back, probably within 48 hours. Next time will be bigger, maybe 3 battalions. Our job hasn't changed. Provide artillery support and defend our gun positions. But this time we're ready. This time they won't breach the perimeter. His gunners prepare. They practice direct fire drills. They stockpile beehive rounds near each gun. They establish communication procedures for rapid fire missions. They're ready. At 2:30 a.m. on May 16, exactly 72 hours after the first assault, the mortars start falling again. May 16, the second assault. Bennett is awake when the mortars hit. He's been sleeping in his command post wearing boots and gear. When the first explosion detonates, he's moving within seconds. The mortar barrage is heavier than May 13. More tubes, more rounds, concentrated on gun positions and command posts. The enemy learned from the first attack. They're targeting critical infrastructure. Bennett reaches his gun line through the bombardment. Explosions all around, shrapnel tearing through the air. His gunners are in defensive positions waiting. They've been through this before. They know the drill. The mortars stop at 2:50 a.m. Bennett braces for what comes next. The assault begins from multiple directions simultaneously. Enemy infantry advancing in waves. Maybe 1,000 soldiers, 3 battalions. The volume of fire is overwhelming. Machine guns, RPGs, automatic rifles. The enemy is attacking with everything. But this time, coral is ready. Bennett's guns begin firing indirect missions at pre-planned defensive targets. Shells explode among enemy formations before they reach the wire. The New Zealand artillery battery positioned nearby joins the fire. American artillery batteries add their firepower. The volume of artillery fire is apocalyptic. Enemy soldiers advance through the artillery fire accepting casualties. Human wave tactics. Keep coming until defenses are overwhelmed. But Australian defensive fire, combined arms, artillery, mortars, machine guns, rifles, creates a wall of steel the enemy can't penetrate. At 3:45 a.m., enemy soldiers breach the wire on the northern perimeter. They're inside. Bennett redirects gun positions 2 and 3 to fire directly at the breach. Beehive rounds spray flechettes into enemy soldiers. The breach is sealed by artillery fire at point-blank range. The fighting lasts 4 hours. Sustained combat, wave after wave of enemy assaults, each wave broken by concentrated defensive fire. Bennett coordinates his artillery throughout, switching between indirect fire on distant targets and direct fire on close threats. His guns fire continuously for 4 hours. At 6:30 a.m., enemy fire slackens then stops. They've withdrawn again. The second assault is over. Bennett walks the battlefield at first light. Enemy bodies everywhere. The counting teams report 70+ confirmed killed. Estimates suggest 150 plus actually killed, accounting for removed casualties. Australian casualties: 11 killed, 28 wounded. The casualty ratio is approximately 7-1 favoring Australians. By military metrics, it's a decisive defensive victory, but Bennett doesn't feel victorious. 11 more dead, more young soldiers who will never go home. Bennett learns later that one of the dead, Private Richard Norton, 19 years old, was killed while rescuing wounded comrades under fire. Norton went back multiple times, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. On his final attempt, he was shot and killed. His actions saved lives. 56 years later, in 2024, Norton will be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for his heroism. But on May 16, 1968, Norton is just another casualty. Another body covered with a poncho. Another soldier who did his duty and died for it. May 16, June 6, the extended battle. The battles at Coral continue intermittently through early June. More assaults, more mortar attacks, more casualties. A second firebase, Balmoral, is established nearby and also comes under attack. Bennett's battery supports both firebases. His guns fire thousands of rounds over 3 weeks. The intensity varies, but the pressure is constant. Every night could bring another assault. Every mortar barrage could precede infantry attack. By June 6, the enemy withdraws from the area. Australian forces have held Coral and Balmoral. The North Vietnamese offensive toward Saigon has been disrupted. The firebases accomplished their mission. Final casualty accounting for the extended battle: 25 Australians killed, over 100 wounded. Enemy casualties estimated at 300 plus killed, unknown wounded. The Battle of Coral-Balmoral becomes the longest and bloodiest engagement involving Australian forces in the Vietnam War. It demonstrates that Australian forces can hold against regimental-sized assaults. It proves that combined arms defense, artillery, infantry, air support, can defeat numerically superior forces. But for Bennett, the battle represents something else. It represents 25 dead soldiers. It represents decisions made under pressure. It represents the weight of command during sustained combat. The aftermath, CARRYNG, the weight. Bennett survived Coral-Balmoral. He continued his military career, retired as a colonel, received military honors for his leadership during the battle. But the honors never erase the memories. In interviews decades later, Bennett described Coral as the most intense experience of his life. 4 hours of sustained combat, enemy soldiers at point-blank range, artillery firing directly at human targets. You do what's necessary in the moment. Later, you process what you did. The processing never stops. Bennett suffered from survivor's guilt. Why did he survive when 25 others died? Why did his leadership keep the firebase intact but couldn't prevent those casualties? Intellectually, he understood that casualties were inevitable given the tactical situation. Emotionally, understanding doesn't ease guilt. Bennett became an advocate for artillery tactics and firebase defense. He lectured at military schools about lessons from Coral. He emphasized the importance of adequate defensive preparation before establishing firebases. He described how rushed deployment creates vulnerabilities that cost lives. Coral was preventable, Bennett said in a 2010 interview. If we'd had 48 more hours for defensive preparation before the first assault, casualties would have been lower. Time pressure forced compromises. Those compromises killed soldiers. That's the lesson. Time spent on proper defensive preparation saves lives. 2018, 50 years later. May 12, 2018, Coral-Balmoral commemoration ceremony. Bennett is 84 years old. He stands at the memorial honoring the 25 Australians who died during the extended battle. Their names are inscribed on stone. Bennett knows every name. He commanded some of them. He worked alongside others. He remembers their faces. A journalist asks Bennett what he remembers most about Coral. Bennett's answer is immediate. The sound of artillery firing direct fire at human targets, the smell of cordite and blood, the fear that my guns would be overrun and we'd lose the firebase, and the faces of the men who died. I remember their faces more clearly than anything else. The journalist asks if Bennett considers himself a hero. Bennett's response: no, heroes are the soldiers who held defensive positions against impossible odds. Heroes are the soldiers like Richard Norton who went back for wounded comrades knowing they might die. I just did my job. They did the dying. The truth about defensive warfare is not a single moment of cinematic heroics. It is 1,000 tiny, terrible choices stacked on top of each other until a life-or-death decision becomes routine. It's the quiet calculations you make at 02:03 in the morning, with mortar smoke in your eyes and blood on your hands, when the radio crackles and the only available option is imperfect. You do the thing that keeps the most people alive now, even if the cost later breaks you. Picture it close: the taste of metal in your mouth from cordite, that hot, oily tang that sticks to the tongue after artillery fires round after round, the vibration of a howitzer firing direct on the berm beside you, the ground itself answering with a dull, hungry thud. The way the night is full of movement, and yet no shape is safe. A shadow is not just a shadow, it's a boot, a rifle, a man you once shared tinned food with. You learn to read danger in the stutters of breath and the direction of gun flashes. You learn that courage is small and sustained. Staying with your post when every instinct screams to run, calling for fire on coordinates that may include your friends, ordering a reload when the belt is running thin because the alternative is silence. Defensive warfare teaches you about improvisation. The tools you were given, the doctrine, the checklists, the standard operating procedures are useful. They are the scaffolding. But combat is an architect's nightmare. The structure shifts, foundations crumble, and you have to invent methods on the spot. Phil Bennett didn't become legendary because he followed a manual. He improvised, turning an indirect weapon into a direct one, accepting the risks of danger-close fire because those risks were preferable to being overrun. That choice is ugly and pragmatic. It saves lives. It also leaves a mark on the man who orders it. There is also the arithmetic of guilt. After the guns fall silent, the counting begins. Bodies, names. The small notebook you carry for logistics becomes a list of people you will never see again. Command carries casualty numbers the way civilians carry photos, behind the ribs, heavy and private. You can justify the math, kill ratios, tactical necessity, strategic outcome, until you try to sleep. Numbers do not comfort the widows, nor do they make the young man who dug beside you any less real. Leadership is making decisions that alter more lives than your own, and then surviving to carry the sorrow. Listen to what the survivors tell you decades later. They will not boast about that night. They will tell you about the runner who kept going until he dropped, about the corporal who dragged mates to safety with his last breath, about the sergeant who would not be evacuated because the gun line would not be left short-handed. They remember faces, names, jokes, a cigarette stub, tiny human things amid the brutality. They remember favors and small acts of mercy that had nothing to do with tactics, sharing a blanket, holding another man's hand while he dies, whispering a name so someone's last thought was of home. And then there is institutional memory. The lessons of Coral Balmoral are recorded and taught. Fortify before you arrive, depth of defenses, integrated fires, reserve forces positioned for counterattack. Those lessons save future lives. But institutional memory is cold. It stores diagrams and timings, not the smell of the night or the empty chair at a mess table. The real inheritance of a battle like Coral is twofold. One, the tactical adjustments that make subsequent deployments safer. Two, the moral responsibility that leaders like Bennett carry into the rest of their lives. That responsibility shows up in small, steady ways. It is the old officer who speaks bluntly to a class of cadets about the cost of rushing a firebase into being. It is the veteran who sits quietly at a memorial and traces names with his thumb. It is the commander who insists on extra hours of digging and extra wire, even when his superiors say, "We don't have time." The thing you cannot teach in a manual is the internal ledger. A life saved, a life lost, the glance that meant maybe we could have done better. Leaders live with that ledger long after the parades end. So when you watch a night vision clip or hear an interview framed like a triumph, stop and ask, which part of the story are they telling? Are they showing the coordinated fire, or are they skipping the 3 quiet days of digging and the private apology whispered over a grave? Both are true. Both matter. The headline about victory survives a news cycle. The burden survives a lifetime. This is why the story of Coral Balmoral matters beyond tactics. It is a lesson in human limits and human resources, how much a man can ask of other men, and how much a group will give when a leader shows steadfastness instead of bravado. It is a story about the small mercies that make sustained courage possible, the medic who refuses to leave a comrade, the gunner who reloads until his arms fail, the young private who follows an order because the man next to him relied on it. If you take one thing away from Coral, let it be this. Defensive warfare is less about glory and more about stewardship. It is about stewarding lives through decisions made under fire. Phil Bennett's guns held because his men trusted him to use every tool at his command, because he made the hard calls that night, and because he accepted their inevitable cost. He carried that cost like a private ledger until he died, and that, perhaps more than medals or doctrine, is the true measure of what leadership actually costs. Remember their names. Remember the ways they saved each other. And when the next generation asks what courage looks like, show them Coral not as a tale of triumph, but as a manual for humanity under pressure. When you know you're fighting the last battle of a war that's already lost, victory isn't about winning. It's about proving you never stopped being soldiers. June 5, 1971, 600 hours, Long Con Province, Vietnam. Major Jim Shelton watches the jungle through his binoculars and knows something is very wrong. He's 36 years old, commander of B Company, 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. His company is preparing to move into the Long Con area, thick jungle northeast of Saigon, where intelligence suggests North Vietnamese forces are staging. Behind him, Centurion tanks idle, their diesel engines rumbling like mechanical thunder. Around him, his soldiers check weapons and adjust gear. Shelton has been in Vietnam for 8 months. He's seen combat, he's lost men. He understands the rhythms of this war, the ambushes, the firefights, the sudden violence followed by silence. But this operation feels different. The intelligence is too specific, the enemy force too large, the timing too precise. And there's something else, something nobody says out loud but everyone knows. Australia is withdrawing from Vietnam. American forces are leaving. The war is winding down. Politicians in Canberra have already announced the withdrawal timeline. By year's end, Australian combat troops will be gone. Which means Operation Overlord. This deployment into Long Con to intercept North Vietnamese regulars is likely the last major battle Australian forces will fight in this war. Shelton doesn't know if that makes the operation more important or more pointless. You're sending soldiers to fight and potentially die in the final engagement of a war everyone knows is ending. What do you tell them? Fight hard because this is the last time. Be careful because dying in the last battle is the worst kind of irony. Shelton doesn't have good answers, so he focuses on what he can control: tactics, preparation, leadership. Make sure his soldiers are ready. Make sure they understand the mission. Make sure they survive. A radio call interrupts his thoughts. Sunray, this is Niner Alpha. SAS has updated intelligence. Enemy force is larger than initial estimates. Multiple battalions. Approximately 1,500 to 2,000 enemy troops in operational area. Recommend full combat readiness. Shelton's stomach tightens. 1,500 to 2,000 enemy troops. His company has maybe 120 soldiers. Even with 4 RARNZ and the Centurion tanks, they're outnumbered at least 4 to 1, possibly more. He keys his radio. Understood. Moving to objective now. Out. Shelton turns to his platoon commanders. SAS confirms large enemy presence. Multiple battalions. We're going in with tanks and full support. Expect heavy contact. Questions. One of his lieutenants, Lieutenant Peter Graham, 24 years old, 3 months in country, asks the question everyone is thinking. Sir, are we really doing this? Full offensive operation when we're withdrawing in 6 months. Shelton looks at Graham. Young officer, good soldier, deserves an honest answer. Yes, we're doing this. The mission is to prevent NVA forces from staging an offensive towards Saigon. If we don't stop them here, they'll hit South Vietnamese positions that aren't ready to defend. Vietnamization means the South Vietnamese military needs time to prepare. We're buying that time. That's the mission. That's what we're doing. Graham nods, accepts the answer. Shelton wishes he believed it as much as Graham seems to. If you want to know how Australian soldiers and New Zealand troops fought the last major battle of their war with Centurion tanks and SAS reconnaissance against North Vietnamese regulars who outnumbered them 4 to 1, hit that like button. This is Operation Overlord. The battle where Jim Shelton's company proved that even in a war everyone knew was ending, soldiers still fought like it mattered. 3 days before Operation Overlord begins, SAS Sergeant Kev Morrison is lying in jungle undergrowth watching North Vietnamese soldiers walk past his position. Morrison is 29 years old, 1st Australian SAS Squadron. He's been on long-range reconnaissance patrol in Long Con province for 6 days. His 4-man team has been observing enemy movements, counting troops, identifying staging areas. Standard SAS mission. Observe. Report. Don't engage unless necessary. What Morrison is seeing isn't standard. He's watching his 3rd North Vietnamese company move through this area in the past 18 hours. Not small patrols, full companies, maybe 100 soldiers per company, moving with discipline, carrying heavy weapons, establishing fighting positions. Morrison has been doing SAS reconnaissance for 3 years. He knows what enemy battalion movements look like. This is battalion level, multiple battalions, staging for something big. He whispers into his radio, barely audible even a meter away. 0, this is 9 or 2. Multiple enemy companies observed grid reference 847-392. Estimate battalion strength. Heavy weapons. Defensive positions being constructed. Request extraction and full intelligence briefing. The response comes back 30 seconds later. 9 or 2, remain in position. Continue observation. Higher wants confirmation of force strength before committing resources. Morrison suppresses frustration. He's already confirmed force strength. He's watching hundreds of enemy soldiers. What more confirmation does higher command need? But Morrison is a professional. He follows orders. His team remains in position. They observe for another 48 hours. The enemy presence grows. More companies arrive. More staging areas established. Morrison's reports become increasingly urgent. By June 4, Morrison's intelligence indicates at least 1,500 enemy troops in the Long Con area. Multiple North Vietnamese battalions. D445 local force battalion elements. Staging areas suggesting preparation for offensive operations towards Saigon. Morrison's final report before extraction is blunt. Enemy is preparing major offensive. Multiple battalions. Heavy weapons. Time-sensitive target. Recommend immediate interdiction before enemy completes staging. That report reaches Major Shelton on June 4. Within 12 hours, Operation Overlord is approved. 3 RAR and 4 RAR-NZ will deploy with Centurion tank support to intercept enemy forces before they can launch their offensive. Morrison's SAS team is extracted on June 5. As his helicopter lifts off, Morrison looks down at the jungle where he spent 6 days watching enemy soldiers prepare for battle. Somewhere down there, Australian infantry is about to walk into a fight with an enemy force that outnumbers them significantly. Morrison hopes his intelligence was accurate. He hopes the infantry commanders believe his reports. He hopes the soldiers going in understand what they're facing. Shelton's company moves into the operational area at 800 hours. The Centurion tanks, 6 massive 50-ton beasts with 20-pounder guns, move with the infantry. Tank commanders coordinate with infantry platoon leaders. Combined arms operation. Infantry provides security for tanks. Tanks provide firepower for infantry. The jungle is thick, triple canopy. Visibility may be 30 meters. The tanks crash through undergrowth, clearing paths. Infantry moves in platoon formation, spread out, weapons ready, watching tree lines. Shelton walks near the center of the formation, radio on his back, map in hand. He's coordinating movement, watching for enemy contact, maintaining communication with battalion headquarters. At 10:15 hours, the lead platoon makes contact. The firing starts suddenly, as it always does, automatic weapons from the tree line. Shelton hits the ground. Around him, soldiers return fire. The distinctive crack of AK-47s, the heavier thump of RPG launchers. Shelton keys his radio. Contact front, lead platoon engaged. Request tank support forward. The nearest Centurion, call sign 2 Charlie, crashes forward through the undergrowth. The tank commander, Sergeant Mike Hughes, traverses the turret toward enemy positions. The 20-pounder gun fires. The explosion is deafening. Trees disintegrate. Enemy fire slackens. Shelton coordinates his platoons. First platoon maintains suppressive fire. Second platoon maneuvers left to flank enemy positions. The Centurions move forward, firing high-explosive rounds into suspected enemy locations. The firefight lasts 20 minutes. Then enemy fire stops. Silence. The NVA has withdrawn. Standard tactic. Engage, inflict casualties, withdraw before Australian firepower can concentrate. Shelton moves forward to assess. His lead platoon has 2 wounded, neither seriously. They killed or wounded maybe 10 enemy soldiers. Hard to tell because the enemy removed their casualties. Standard outcome for initial contact. But Shelton knows this was just the beginning. The SAS reports indicated 1,500 enemy troops. His company just engaged maybe a platoon. The main enemy force is still out there, waiting, watching, preparing. Shelton briefs his company. That was probing action. They're testing our response. Main force is still ahead. Stay alert. Expect heavier contact. His soldiers understand. They've been through this before. But there's tension in their faces. They know the numbers. They know they're outnumbered. They know this might be the last major fight. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone knows. At 1400 hours on June 5, B Company advances deeper into the operational area. The SAS intelligence indicated enemy staging areas approximately 2 kilometers ahead. Shelton's mission is to locate and engage enemy forces before they can complete offensive preparations. The terrain is brutal, thick jungle, no clear fields of fire. The Centurion tanks struggle through undergrowth. Infantry moves slowly, checking every tree line, every possible ambush position. At 15:30 hours, Shelton's lead platoon reaches a clearing, maybe 100 meters wide. On the far side, jungle. Good defensive terrain for enemy forces. Shelton doesn't like it. Crossing that clearing means exposing his soldiers to potential enemy fire from concealed positions. But bypassing it means deviating from the mission route. And time is critical. The longer they delay, the more time the enemy has to complete offensive preparations. Shelton makes the tactical decision. We cross the clearing, tanks first to draw fire. Infantry follows in assault formation. If contact occurs, tanks suppress while infantry assaults. His platoon commanders acknowledge. The Centurions move forward into the clearing, exposed, vulnerable to RPGs, but tank armor can withstand small arms fire that would kill infantry. The tanks are halfway across when the enemy opens fire. The volume of fire is overwhelming. Multiple machine guns, RPGs, automatic rifles. The enemy isn't a platoon. This is company-sized. Maybe multiple companies, firing from concealed positions in the tree line. RPG rounds impact the Centurion tanks. One tank, call sign 3 Bravo, takes an RPG hit on the turret. The explosion is massive, but the armor holds. The tank keeps moving. Sergeant Hughes keys the battalion net. Contact, multiple enemy positions. Company-sized force, engaging. The Centurions return fire. The 20-pounder guns roar. High-explosive rounds tear into the tree line. Sections of jungle explode, but the enemy fire continues. They're well-positioned, well-prepared. This isn't a hasty ambush. This is a prepared defensive position. Shelton orders his infantry forward. 2nd and 3rd platoons assault toward the tree line while 1st platoon provides suppressive fire. The soldiers move in rushes, 3 to 5 seconds of running, then hit the ground, fire, move again. The enemy fire is accurate. Shelton sees 2 of his soldiers go down, 1 in 2nd platoon, 1 in 3rd. Medics move forward under fire to provide aid. The wounded are pulled back to covered positions. The firefight develops into sustained combat, not a brief engagement, not hit and run, full battle. The Centurions fire continuously, 20-pounder rounds, machine guns. The infantry fights platoon by platoon, advancing under covering fire from the tanks and supporting platoons. American helicopter gunships arrive at 16:15 hours. The door gunners strafe enemy positions with machine guns. Rocket pods launch 2.75-inch rockets into the tree line. The combined firepower, tanks, infantry, helicopters, is devastating. But the enemy doesn't break. They hold their positions, return fire. This is North Vietnamese regulars, not local force, not guerrillas. Professional soldiers in prepared positions fighting a delaying action. At 1800 hours, the enemy fire finally begins to slacken. Not because they're defeated, because they're conducting tactical withdrawal. Standard NVA doctrine: fight, delay, withdraw, make the enemy pay for every meter. By 1900 hours, the enemy has withdrawn completely. Shelton's company secures the objective. The clearing and tree line are theirs. Shelton walks the battlefield assessing casualties and damage. 3 Australian soldiers killed, 8 wounded, 1 Centurion tank damaged but operational. They killed maybe 40 enemy soldiers. Confirmed bodies plus drag marks indicating more casualties removed. But Shelton knows this is incomplete accounting. The enemy withdrew in good order. They removed most casualties. They'll regroup, rearm, prepare for the next engagement. This is only the beginning. The 8-hour firefight is just the opening of Operation Overlord. More fighting ahead, more casualties, more dead soldiers in the final battle of a war everyone knows is ending. Shelton briefs his exhausted company. We held. We won the tactical engagement, but the enemy is still out there. Tomorrow we continue. Stay sharp. Stay together, we finish this mission. His soldiers nod, bone-tired, blood on their uniforms, weapons hot from continuous firing, but they're professionals, they'll continue, they'll fight. Because that's what soldiers do, even in the last battle of a war that's already lost. The fighting continues for 5 more days, not continuous combat, intermittent engagements, B company advances, makes contact, fights. Enemy withdraws, company advances again. More contact, more fighting. The pattern repeats. Each engagement lasts 1 to 3 hours. Each engagement costs casualties, 1 or 2 killed, 3 or 4 wounded. Each engagement inflicts enemy casualties, 10 to 20 confirmed killed, unknown wounded. The mathematics are brutal. Shelton's company is winning every tactical engagement. The casualty ratios favor the Australians, maybe 8 to 1, possibly 10 to 1. But favorable ratios don't change the fundamental problem. Australian forces are outnumbered. The enemy can absorb casualties. The Australians can't. By June 10, Shelton's company has been reduced by casualties and exhaustion. He started Operation Overlord with 120 soldiers. Now he has maybe 90 effectives, the rest killed, wounded, or evacuated for medical reasons. The Centurion tanks continue to perform. The armor protects crews. The 20-pounder guns provide firepower that enemy weapons can't match, but even tanks have limitations. Mechanical breakdowns, ammunition expenditure, crew exhaustion. On June 9, one of the Centurions, call sign 4 Alpha, throws a track during movement. The tank is immobilized. Engineers work under covering fire to repair it. Takes 4 hours. The tank is operational again, but the incident reminds everyone that equipment fails. Machines break. In combat, equipment failure can mean death. The SAS continues to provide reconnaissance throughout the operation. Kevin Morrison's team and 2 other SAS patrols observe enemy movements, identify new staging areas, direct Australian forces toward high-value targets. The SAS reconnaissance is critical. Without it, Australian forces would be operating blind in thick jungle against an enemy that knows the terrain. Morrison's reports indicate the enemy is withdrawing from the operational area, not defeated, withdrawing. The North Vietnamese recognize they can't complete offensive preparations with Australian forces interdicting their staging areas. They're relocating, moving to different areas where Australian forces can't reach them before withdrawal. Which means Operation Overlord is succeeding. The mission was to prevent NVA offensive toward Saigon. That mission is accomplished. The enemy is withdrawing. The offensive is disrupted. But success is measured in dead soldiers. 7 more Australians killed between June 6 and June 10. 16 more wounded. Additional New Zealand casualties. The enemy probably lost 81-20 killed, estimates based on confirmed bodies and intelligence reports. Favorable casualty ratio, tactical victories, strategic success, mission accomplished. And 10 dead Australians, the final significant combat deaths in the entire Australian-Vietnam War commitment. On June 11, Major Shelton receives orders to withdraw from the operational area. The enemy has dispersed. Intelligence indicates no significant enemy formations remain in Long Con. The mission is complete. Operation Overlord is over. Shelton briefs his company, "We're pulling out. Mission accomplished. Enemy offensive disrupted. Well done. Stay alert during extraction. Enemy could still engage during withdrawal." His soldiers are relieved, exhausted, glad to be leaving. But there's no celebration. Too many casualties, too many friends wounded or killed. You don't celebrate after losing 10 men, even in tactical victory. The extraction takes 3 days. Helicopters ferry soldiers back to base. The Centurion tanks drive out, long columns of armor crashing through jungle. American helicopter gunships provide security. No enemy contact during withdrawal. By June 14, Operation Overlord is officially complete. Final casualty accounting: 10 Australians killed, 24 wounded. New Zealand casualties: enemy losses estimated at 81-20 confirmed killed with unknown wounded. The operation is considered a significant tactical and strategic success. Enemy offensive disrupted. NVA forced to withdraw. Saigon approaches secured. Mission accomplished. Shelton writes letters to the families of his 10 dead soldiers. Standard procedure. Company commander writes to next of kin. Shelton has written these letters before. Never gets easier. What do you say? Your son died fighting bravely in Operation Overlord. His sacrifice prevented enemy offensive. He died in the final major battle of the war. Shelton settles on honesty. Your son was a professional soldier who did his duty under difficult circumstances. He fought with courage. He is missed by his comrades. His service mattered. The letters feel inadequate. They always do. How do you summarize a life in 2 paragraphs? How do you explain why someone's son died in the last battle of a war everyone knows is ending? Shelton doesn't have good answers. He writes the letters. He signs them. He forwards them through military channels, and he carries the weight. After Operation Overlord, Australian combat operations in Vietnam wind down rapidly. Small patrols continue, limited engagements, but no major battles. The political decision has been made. Australian forces are withdrawing. By December 1971, final Australian combat troops leave Vietnam. Limited advisory presence remains until 1972, but the war for Australian forces is effectively over. Operation Overlord was the last major battle, the last significant engagement, the last time Australian forces fought North Vietnamese regulars in sustained combat. The 10 soldiers who died during Overlord were the final significant Australian combat deaths in the entire Vietnam War. Individual soldiers died in subsequent small engagements or accidents, but Overlord was the last battle that killed multiple Australians in combat operations, which means those 10 soldiers died in the final chapter of Australian military involvement in Vietnam. Not at the beginning when the war seemed winnable, not in the middle during major offensives, at the end, in the last battle, when everyone already knew Australia was leaving. Does that make their deaths more tragic, more pointless, or does it make their sacrifice more significant, proof that even in a losing war, soldiers still fought with professionalism and courage? Shelton struggled with these questions for decades. Jim Shelton survived Operation Overlord, continued his military career, retired as a lieutenant colonel, received military decorations for his leadership during the battle. But decorations don't erase memories. In interviews decades later, Shelton described Overlord as the most complex operation he commanded. Fighting a major battle when you know your country is withdrawing creates psychological complexity. You're asking soldiers to risk death in a war that's already lost. How do you motivate that? You focus on mission, on professionalism, on the soldiers next to you. You fight because your mates are fighting. You hold because quitting means letting your mates down. Shelton suffered from survivor's guilt, common among combat commanders. I made tactical decisions that saved some lives and couldn't save others. The 10 who died, I knew most of them, commanded some, worked with others. You carry that. You wonder if different decisions would have changed outcomes. Intellectually, I know we fought the battle as well as possible given circumstances. Emotionally, knowing doesn't ease guilt. Shelton became an advocate for combined arms warfare and the importance of reconnaissance. He lectured at Australian military schools about lessons from Overlord. He emphasized how SAS reconnaissance provided decisive intelligence advantage, how Centurion tanks provided firepower that infantry couldn't match, how coordinated operations between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support defeated numerically superior forces. Overlord demonstrated that small, well-trained forces with superior tactics and technology can defeat larger enemies, Shelton said in a 2015 interview. But victory costs. 10 dead is 10 too many. Success doesn't erase casualties. We accomplished the mission. I'm proud of my soldiers, but I'll carry those 10 deaths forever. June 5, 2021. Operation Overlord Commemoration Ceremony. Shelton is 86 years old. He stands at the memorial honoring the soldiers who died during the battle. 10 names. 10 soldiers who died in the final major engagement of Australian involvement in Vietnam. A journalist asks Shelton what he remembers most about Overlord. Shelton's answer is immediate. The sound of Centurion tanks firing, the smell of cordite and jungle, the radio calls reporting casualties, and the faces of the 10 who died. Some were 19 years old, barely old enough to vote, dead in the last battle of a war we were leaving. I remember their faces more clearly than the tactical details. The journalist asks if Overlord was worth the cost. Shelton's response: strategically, yes. We disrupted enemy offensive, bought time for Vietnamization, accomplished mission. Tactically, yes. We defeated larger force, won every engagement, but was it worth 10 dead soldiers? That question doesn't have a good answer. Those soldiers did their duty. Their sacrifice mattered to their mates. Whether the broader war was worth it, that's above my pay grade. I commanded soldiers, they fought. Some died, that's the reality. The truth about final battles. Here's what nobody tells you about fighting the last battle of a war. It doesn't feel different than any other battle. Enemy bullets kill the same way. Fear feels identical. Tactical decisions are just as complex. The difference isn't in the fighting, it's in the meaning. When you're fighting at the beginning of a war, there's hope. Maybe this war can be won. Maybe this sacrifice will matter. Maybe this death will contribute to ultimate victory. When you're fighting at the end of a war, when withdrawal is already announced, when politicians have declared the conflict effectively over, the meaning changes. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting for mission completion, for professional standards, for the soldiers next to you. Jim Shelton commanded Australian soldiers in the final major battle of the Vietnam War. He coordinated infantry and armor against numerically superior forces. He made decisions that saved the majority of his company while losing 10 soldiers. And he carried the weight of those 10 deaths for the rest of his life. Operation Overlord isn't a story about Australian military glory. It's a story about soldiers doing their duty in the final engagement of a war everyone knew was ending. It's a story about professional forces defeating larger enemies through superior tactics, training, and combined arms coordination. It's a story about one commander's leadership during the last battle and the permanent weight of command decisions. If this story made you understand what final battles look like, share it. The 10 Australians who died during Operation Overlord deserve to be remembered. The hundreds who fought deserve recognition. And Jim Shelton deserves acknowledgement as a leader who commanded the last major battle of Australia's Vietnam War. Drop a comment if you want more stories about real battles, not Hollywood versions. This history matters. Understanding how wars end matters. Truth about final battles and the soldiers who fight them matters more than myths about glorious last stands. And if you made it this far, remember this. Final battles aren't about heroics. They're about completing the mission despite knowing the broader war is already lost. They're about professional soldiers maintaining standards even when strategic circumstances have changed. Jim Shelton did that at Long Con. His soldiers did that. They fought the last major battle of Australian involvement in Vietnam. They won every engagement. They accomplished the mission. And 10 soldiers died, proving that even in wars that are ending, combat still kills. That's the real lesson of Operation Overlord. Not that good tactics always win. Not that superior firepower overcomes all obstacles. The lesson is that professional soldiers fight with discipline and courage regardless of broader strategic circumstances. They complete missions. They protect their mates. They maintain standards. Shelton proved that in June 1971, and he carried the weight of that proof, 10 names on a memorial, for the rest of his life. There's a moment in every battle when you realize dying is easy. It's staying alive that requires everything you have. May 26, 1970, 3:00 a.m. Fire Support Base Balmoral, Vietnam. Captain Brian McFarlane snaps awake to silence. That's what terrifies him. Not explosions, not gunfire, silence. McFarlane is 29 years old, commander of B Company, 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. His company, approximately 100 soldiers, is responsible for defending the northern sector of Fire Support Base Balmoral. They've been at the firebase for 8 days. 8 days of probing attacks. 8 days of mortar harassment. 8 days of waiting for the assault everyone knows is coming. And now the silence. McFarlane lies in his defensive position listening. The jungle beyond the perimeter is completely quiet. No insects, no night birds, no ambient sound. In Vietnam, silence means predators, and the only predators in this jungle are human. McFarlane keys his radio, whispers, "All stations stand to, something's coming." His platoon commanders acknowledge immediately. They feel it too, the wrongness. Soldiers throughout B Company quietly shift into defensive positions, weapons ready, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the wire. The silence stretches, 30 seconds, 1 minute. McFarlane's heart hammers. His hands sweat despite the cool night air. Every combat instinct he's developed over 18 months in Vietnam is screaming that enemy forces are out there in the darkness, massing, preparing, waiting for the signal to attack. Then the mortars start falling. McFarlane doesn't have time to be afraid. The first rounds impact near his position, throwing dirt and shrapnel. He's moving, shouting orders, coordinating response, checking on his soldiers. Around him, B Company is responding exactly as trained, taking cover, returning fire at suspected mortar positions, calling artillery support. The mortar barrage lasts exactly 7 minutes, then stops. McFarlane knows what comes next. Infantry assault. The mortars were preparation. Now comes the main event. The enemy attacks from 3 directions simultaneously. Not probing, not testing. Full regimental assault. Maybe 2,000 soldiers attacking a firebase defended by 400 Australians. McFarlane's sector, the northern perimeter, receives the heaviest assault. Hundreds of enemy soldiers advancing in waves toward his positions. McFarlane makes rapid-fire decisions, coordinate defensive fire, direct artillery support, redistribute ammunition, reinforce weak points, all while bullets are impacting around him and soldiers are dying and the enemy keeps coming in waves that seem endless. Over the next 6 hours, McFarlane will fight the most intense battle of his military career. He'll make decisions that save lives and decisions that cost lives. He'll watch soldiers he's commanded for months die defending positions they could have abandoned but chose to hold. He'll discover that command under fire isn't about heroics. It's about functioning when everything is chaos and death is meters away. If you want to know how one company commander held the northern perimeter of Balmoral against overwhelming assault through leadership that refused to accept defeat, hit that like button. This is the Battle of Balmoral. The night Brian McFarlane learned that courage isn't fearlessness, it's functioning despite fear. May 17, 1970, the weight of memory. 1 week before the battle, McFarlane sits in his tent at the forward staging area writing in his journal. It's a habit he's maintained throughout his deployment, recording thoughts, observations, fears he can't share with his soldiers. Tonight's entry reads, "We deploy to Balmoral tomorrow, another fire base in enemy territory. Command says we've learned from Coral in '68, but I was at Coral. I remember the chaos, the mortars falling. The enemy inside the perimeter, 9 dead in the first assault. I was a lieutenant then, younger, less experienced, not responsible for an entire company. Now I command 100 men. If we're hit like Coral was, those 100 men live or die based on my decisions. That weight is crushing sometimes." McFarlane doesn't share these thoughts with anyone. Company commanders can't show doubt. Soldiers need to believe their leaders are confident and capable. Doubt is contagious. McFarlane keeps his fears private. But the fears are real. Coral haunts him. He remembers specific moments with painful clarity. The sound of mortars incoming. The muzzle flashes of enemy AK-47s meters away. The screaming. The chaos. The bodies of Australian soldiers covered with ponchos at first light. McFarlane closes his journal and tries to sleep. But sleep doesn't come easy. Tomorrow he leads his company to Balmoral, and history suggests that fire bases near Coral don't end well. May 18, 1968, the shadow of Coral. McFarlane receives the briefing for Operation Tone Thang 8 days before Balmoral. First Australian task force will establish a second fire base, Balmoral, approximately 6 kilometers north of Fire Support Base Coral. The briefing references Coral extensively. The battles there 2 years ago, the casualties, the lessons learned. McFarlane was at Coral in 1968. He was a lieutenant then, commanding a platoon. He remembers the chaos, the mortars falling, the enemy soldiers inside the perimeter, the desperate fighting. 9 Australians died in the first assault, more in subsequent attacks. Coral became legendary in Australian military circles, the fire base that held against impossible odds but paid in blood. Now command wants to establish Balmoral in the same general area. McFarlane understands the strategic logic. The fire base will interdict North Vietnamese infiltration routes toward Saigon, but understanding strategy doesn't ease the knot in his stomach. During the briefing, McFarlane asks about defensive preparation time. The answer: 72 hours from establishment to operational status. Defensive positions will be dug. Wire will be complete. Artillery registered. We learned from Coral. McFarlane wants to believe that, wants to trust that command learned the lessons. But experience has taught him that operational plans rarely survive contact with reality. Time pressure creates shortcuts. Shortcuts create vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities kill soldiers. After the briefing, McFarlane pulls aside his company sergeant major, warrant officer first class Terry O'Hanlon. O'Hanlon is 32, career soldier, veteran of Malaya and Borneo. He's seen enough combat to understand when officers are worried. "What's on your mind, sir?" O'Hanlon asks. McFarlane considers his words carefully. "I was at Coral in '68. It was chaos. If Balmoral gets hit like Coral did, we need to be ready. Perfect defensive preparation. No shortcuts." O'Hanlon nods. "We'll make sure the company is ready, but sir, you can't control everything. Sometimes the enemy gets a vote. Sometimes good soldiers die despite perfect preparation." But McFarlane knows O'Hanlon is right, but knowing doesn't ease the fear. May 1825, building the fortress. Fire Support Base Balmoral is established on May 18. Helicopters ferry infantry, artillery, engineers, and equipment. The location is a clearing in thick jungle, adequate fields of fire after engineers clear vegetation. The fire base is positioned on slightly elevated terrain, providing some tactical advantage. McFarlane's B Company is assigned responsibility for the northern sector. His 3 platoons, 4, 5, and 6 platoons, establish defensive positions covering approximately 300 meters of perimeter. Each platoon digs fighting positions, establishes machine gun positions, coordinates fields of fire. McFarlane is obsessive about defensive preparation. He walks every meter of his sector multiple times daily, checks every fighting position, ensures ammunition is distributed, coordinates with adjacent units on sector boundaries, registers artillery on likely enemy approach routes. O'Hanlon shares McFarlane's obsessiveness. Together they work perfecting the defenses. They identify weak points and reinforce them. They establish secondary positions if primary positions are overrun. They stockpile ammunition in multiple locations, so one lucky enemy mortar hit doesn't deplete an entire sector's ammunition. One afternoon, McFarlane finds Private Michael Grant, 20 years old from Melbourne, digging his fighting position. The position is maybe 18 inches deep. McFarlane stops. "Grant, how deep is that position?" "About half a meter, sir." "It needs to be a full meter. Deeper if possible. Overhead protection too." Grant looks exhausted. "Sir, I've been digging all day. This is the third position I've dug. Can't this be good enough?" McFarlane considers his response. He could order Grant to keep digging, pull rank, but soldiers respond better to explanation than orders. "Grant, when the mortars start falling, 6 inches of depth is the difference between shrapnel wounds and death. I need you alive. Your mates need you alive. Your family back home needs you alive. Dig deeper." Grant looks at McFarlane for a moment, then nods. "Yes, sir, I'll dig deeper." Later, O'Hanlon approaches McFarlane. "That was good leadership, sir. Explaining rather than ordering. Grant will remember that." McFarlane shrugs. "I just want him to survive. All of them. We dig proper positions now or we bury soldiers later." By May 25, B Company's sector is as ready as it can be. Fighting positions are 4 feet deep with overhead protection. Wire obstacles extend 30 meters beyond the perimeter. Claymore mines are positioned to cover likely assault routes. Machine guns are sighted with overlapping fields of fire. Artillery defensive fire targets are registered. But McFarlane knows that perfect preparation doesn't guarantee survival. The enemy gets a vote. If they attack with overwhelming force from unexpected directions, even perfect defenses can be penetrated. On May 25, McFarlane briefs his platoon commanders. Intelligence indicates significant enemy activity in the area, multiple battalions operating nearby. We should expect attack within 48 hours. Likely multi-battalion assault similar to Coral. Our job is simple, hold our sector regardless of enemy pressure. We hold or we die. Questions? Lieutenant Mark Thompson, 6th Platoon Commander, 24 years old, raises his hand. "Sir, what if they penetrate the wire? What's our fallback plan?" McFarlane appreciates the question. Thompson is thinking tactically. "If they breach, we counterattack immediately. Seal the breach before it expands. I'll have company reserve ready to reinforce. But our primary objective is preventing breaches through overwhelming defensive fire." No more questions. His platoon commanders understand. They've been preparing for this since arriving. That night, McFarlane writes a letter to his wife Helen. He doesn't mention the impending battle. Operational security prohibits discussing military operations. But he writes, "I'm thinking about you and the kids. Miss you more than words can express. Tell David and Sarah that Dad loves them and will be home soon. Give them both hugs from me." McFarlane seals the letter and places it with his personal effects. He doesn't mail it yet. He'll mail it after the battle, if he survives. Before sleeping, McFarlane walks his sector one final time, checks on his soldiers, makes sure everyone understands defensive plans, ensures ammunition is distributed, coordinates final details with artillery observers. At 11:00 p.m., McFarlane lies down in his defensive position. He doesn't sleep immediately. He thinks about his company, young men, average age maybe 20, who trust him to bring them home alive. That trust is both honor and burden. McFarlane carries it constantly. Eventually, exhaustion overcomes anxiety. McFarlane sleeps, but it's the light sleep of combat soldiers, aware, ready to respond instantly. 3 hours later, the mortars will wake him, and everything he's prepared for will be tested. May 26, 3:00 a.m. The silence breaks. The mortar barrage is concentrated and accurate. Enemy artillery has pre-registered McFarlane's sector. The first rounds impact on machine gun positions, command posts, ammunition stockpiles. This isn't random fire. This is deliberate targeting based on reconnaissance or intelligence. McFarlane's command post takes a near miss. The explosion throws him against the fighting position wall. His radio operator, Private Kevin Walsh, 19 years old from Sydney, is wounded by shrapnel, blood streaming from his arm, but Walsh stays on the radio calling for counter-battery fire. McFarlane grabs Walsh's arm, checking the wound. "How bad?" "Just shrapnel, sir. I can still work the radio." "Get it bandaged. You're no good to me bleeding out." Walsh applies field dressing while continuing radio operations. The professionalism impresses McFarlane. Wounded but still functioning. That's what combat requires. The Australian artillery responds within 90 seconds. 105 howitzers from Balmoral's gun positions fire at suspected enemy mortar locations. American 155 artillery adds fire support. The counter-battery fire is rapid and intense, but the enemy mortars keep firing. At 3:07 a.m. the mortars stop. 7 minutes of concentrated bombardment. McFarlane knows what's coming. He keys his radio. "All stations stand by for ground assault. Fire on my command." The enemy attacks at 3:09 a.m. McFarlane sees them through the darkness, figures moving toward the wire. Hundreds of them, maybe a full battalion, advancing in 3 waves. The first wave hits the wire. The second wave follows. The third wave waits in reserve. McFarlane gives the order, "Fire." B Company opens up. M60 machine guns, SLR rifles, M79 grenade launchers. The volume of fire is intense. Enemy soldiers fall, but more keep coming. The enemy is accepting casualties to close with the Australian positions. McFarlane is on the radio coordinating fire support. "Sunray, this is Bravo. Heavy contact northern sector. Estimate battalion-sized assault. Request artillery on pre-registered targets Alpha through Delta." The artillery comes in within 2 minutes. Shells explode among enemy formations, but the enemy keeps advancing. McFarlane realizes this assault is different from the probing attacks of the past week. This is committed. The enemy believes they can overrun Balmoral. At 3:25 a.m., enemy soldiers breach the wire in front of 6 platoon. They're through the obstacle, maybe 50 meters from Australian fighting positions. Lieutenant Thompson calls McFarlane. "Sunray Bravo, 6 platoon. Enemy through the wire. We're engaging at close range." McFarlane makes a split-second decision. 6, hold your positions. I'm sending reinforcements. He radios his company reserve, a section from 5 platoon to counterattack the breach. 5 section move to support 6 platoon, seal the breach. 5 section moves under fire. Corporal James Mitchell, 24 years old, married, baby daughter back in Australia, leads them toward the breach. They engage enemy soldiers with grenades and automatic fire. The fighting is desperate, close range, personal, brutal. But 5 section reaches 6 platoon and establishes a defensive line that prevents further enemy penetration. Mitchell is magnificent under fire. McFarlane watches through binoculars as Mitchell directs his section, moving between positions, encouraging soldiers, directing fire, leading by example. That's the kind of NCO leadership that holds units together when everything is chaos. The enemy assault continues for another hour, wave after wave. McFarlane coordinates defensive fire, artillery support, ammunition resupply, casualty evacuation. He's operating at maximum capacity, processing information, making decisions, communicating orders, all while bullets impact around him and explosions shake his position. At 4:30 a.m., the assault begins to falter. Australian defensive fire is too intense. Artillery is breaking up enemy formations before they reach the wire. Helicopter gunships arrive and begin strafing enemy positions with rockets and miniguns. The combined firepower becomes overwhelming. By 5:00 a.m., enemy fire ceases. They've withdrawn. The first assault on Balmoral is over. McFarlane conducts immediate damage assessment. B Company casualties, 3 killed, 11 wounded. His 3 dead soldiers are Private Daniel Hayes, 20 years old, from Brisbane; Private Robert Chen, 21, from Sydney; and Corporal James Mitchell, 24, married with baby daughter. Mitchell died leading the counterattack that sealed the breach. His action saved 6 platoon from being overrun, but Mitchell won't see his daughter again, won't go home to his wife, won't live past 24. McFarlane walks to where Mitchell's body lies covered with a poncho. He kneels beside it. "You saved them, Mitchell. Saved your entire section. Your daughter will know her father was a hero." But saying the words doesn't ease the guilt. McFarlane sent Mitchell to seal that breach. The decision was tactically correct, but Mitchell is still dead because of McFarlane's order. Outside the perimeter, Australian forces count enemy bodies. 47 confirmed dead in B Company's sector. Drag marks indicate many more casualties were removed. Intelligence estimates enemy casualties at 80+ killed in the northern sector alone. The casualty ratio favors the Australians, but 3 dead Australians is 3 too many. May 26-27, the weight increases. The next 24 hours are spent repairing defenses and preparing for the inevitable second assault. Engineers repair wire obstacles. Infantry replaces damaged fighting positions. Ammunition is restocked. Casualties are evacuated. McFarlane walks his sector assessing damage and morale. His soldiers are exhausted but functional. They held against a battalion-sized assault. They proved they could withstand overwhelming force, but everyone knows the enemy will attack again. McFarlane talks with each platoon, checks on wounded soldiers before they're evacuated, thanks soldiers for their performance, makes sure everyone understands the plan for the next assault. One conversation stays with McFarlane. Private Michael Grant, the soldier McFarlane told to dig deeper, approaches. "Sir, Corporal Mitchell saved us. If he hadn't led that counterattack, 6 platoon would have been overrun. His family should know he died a hero." McFarlane promises to ensure Mitchell's family understands, but the word hero bothers McFarlane. Mitchell wasn't trying to be heroic. He was following orders, doing his job. He died because McFarlane sent him to seal a breach. Does that make Mitchell a hero or McFarlane responsible for his death? That night, McFarlane writes in his journal, "Mitchell died today, married, baby daughter, 24 years old. I sent him to seal the breach. He did his job, saved his platoon. Now his daughter grows up without a father. How do I reconcile that? The decision was tactically correct, but correct decisions still kill people. Command means carrying this weight. Mitchell, Hayes, Chen, 3 families destroyed by my orders, and the enemy will attack again tomorrow. How many more will I lose?" McFarlane doesn't share these thoughts with anyone. Company commanders can't show doubt or guilt. Soldiers need confident leadership. McFarlane buries his emotions and focuses on preparation. On May 27, intelligence reports indicate increased enemy activity. Radio intercepts suggest another major assault is planned for May 28. McFarlane briefs his company. They're coming again, probably tomorrow night. Same tactics, mortars then infantry assault. We know their playbook. We're ready. We hold our sector regardless of cost. His soldiers understand. They've been through this before. They'll go through it again. May 28, 2:45 a.m., the second storm. McFarlane is awake when the mortars hit. He's been sleeping in his fighting position fully dressed. When the first explosion detonates, he's responding within seconds. The mortar barrage is heavier than May 26. More tubes, more rounds, concentrated on the same targets as before. The enemy learned nothing new, they're just hitting harder. McFarlane's fighting position takes multiple near misses. Shrapnel tears through sandbags. His new radio operator, Private Stephen Lee, Walsh, was evacuated wounded, hunches over the radio calling counter-battery fire while explosions shake the position. The bombardment lasts 9 minutes, longer than last time, more intense. When it stops, McFarlane knows what's coming. The assault begins at 2:54 a.m. larger than before. Maybe 1,500 soldiers, 3 battalions, attacking from multiple directions. McFarlane's northern sector receives the main effort. The enemy believes if they break through here, they can roll up the entire firebase. They're not wrong. If B Company breaks, Balmoral falls. McFarlane coordinates defensive fire. His machine guns open up. Artillery strikes enemy formations. Helicopter gunships engage, but the enemy keeps coming, accepting casualties, pressing the assault. At 3:15 a.m., enemy soldiers breach the wire in 2 locations simultaneously. McFarlane's worst nightmare, multiple penetrations requiring multiple responses. He doesn't have enough reserves to seal both breaches. McFarlane makes the hardest decision of his career. He'll reinforce one breach and temporarily abandon the other. Concentrate forces. Seal one breach, then counterattack the other. It's risky. The second breach could exploit before he can respond. But splitting forces between both breaches means neither gets sealed. McFarlane keys his radio. 5 platoon counterattack breach Alpha. 6 platoon hold breach Bravo but do not advance. 4 platoon prepare to counterattack breach Bravo on my command. 5 platoon counterattacks breach Alpha. Lieutenant Paul Rogers leads them into close-range fighting. Grenades, automatic fire, bayonets. The fighting is savage, but 5 platoon seals the breach after 20 minutes. Meanwhile, 6 platoon is barely holding breach Bravo. Enemy soldiers are meters from Australian positions. Lieutenant Thompson is wounded but refuses evacuation. He's directing defensive fire from his position. McFarlane commits his final reserve. 4 platoon counterattack breach Bravo now. 4 platoon assaults toward the breach. Lieutenant David Harrison, 26 years old, engaged to be married, leads from the front. The counterattack hits enemy forces from the flank. Combined with 6 platoons' fire, it throws enemy forces back. But Harrison is killed in the assault, hit by AK-47 fire while directing his platoon. 6 more soldiers are wounded. The breach is sealed, but B Company is bleeding. The assault continues until dawn. Over 3 hours of sustained combat. McFarlane coordinates throughout, never resting, constantly making decisions. His voice stays calm despite exhaustion and fear. At 6:00 a.m., enemy fire ceases. They've withdrawn. The second assault is over. McFarlane walks his sector at first light. The damage is severe. Multiple positions destroyed. Wire torn apart. Bodies scattered across the battlefield. Final casualty count for B Company: 6 killed, 23 wounded, nearly 30% casualties. But they held. Against 2 battalion-sized assaults, B Company held their sector. The firebase didn't fall. Outside the perimeter, 96 confirmed enemy dead in B Company's sector. Intelligence estimates actual casualties at 150 plus. The casualty ratio is approximately 5-to-1 favoring Australians. But 6 dead soldiers represent 6 families destroyed. The aftermath, CARYNG the wait forever. McFarlane received the Military Cross for his leadership. His decisions became examples taught at academies. But the honor never erased the faces. Mitchell leading the counterattack, Harrison charging the breach, Hayes, Chen, the others whose deaths McFarlane ordered through tactically correct decisions that cost lives. McFarlane left Vietnam in December 1970, continued his career, retired as brigadier, but Balmoral never left him. In a 2015 interview, "Everything before prepared me for Balmoral. Everything after was shaped by it. I made decisions that saved 94 soldiers and cost 6 their lives. You carry those 6 forever." McFarlane suffered from PTSD, sought therapy, spoke publicly about combat trauma. Command means carrying weight, the weight of soldiers who died following your orders. You carry that until you die. 2020, 50 years later. May 26, 2020, virtual commemoration ceremony. McFarlane 79 speaks via video. We held because soldiers refused to quit. Mitchell and Harrison died doing their duty. They're heroes. I just gave orders. They did the dying. A family member asks what he wants people to remember. Remember that defensive warfare isn't glorious. It's holding ground because quitting means everyone dies. Remember that leadership means impossible decisions. Remember that the soldiers who died were young men with futures. They gave those futures so others could survive. Remember them. The final truth. Command under fire isn't about tactics. It's functioning when your world is exploding and soldiers you know are dying because of orders you gave. Brian McFarlane commanded through 2 major assaults. His decisions saved the northern sector. His leadership prevented catastrophe. But McFarlane carried 6 dead soldiers forever. 6 young men who died following his orders. The Battle of Balmoral is about impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. About soldiers holding ground they could have abandoned. About the cost of leadership. If this made you understand what command means, share it. The 6 Australians who died deserve remembrance. The 94 who survived deserve recognition. McFarlane deserves acknowledgement as a leader who saved his company while carrying guilt forever. This history matters. Understanding command matters. Truth about sacrifice matters more than myths. Remember, defensive warfare isn't about heroics. It's about holding despite overwhelming odds. It's about decisions that save some while losing others. It's about carrying that weight forever. McFarlane did that. His soldiers did that. They held because quitting meant everyone dies. That's the lesson worth remembering. War doesn't leave clean endings. It leaves memories, scars, and stories that deserve to be remembered. The Australians who fought in Vietnam didn't ask to be heroes. But history remembers them because they refused to fall when everything around them did. If you want more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the truth behind the battles the world forgets, subscribe. Not for numbers, but so these stories and the men who lived them are never forgotten.